The bone-deep cold of the creek water had turned Penelope's fingers a dangerous shade of blue. But she kept scrubbing the wool dress against the rocks anyway, because clean clothes meant dignity, and dignity was all she had left in this unforgiving world. February in Nevada Territory, 1867, was not forgiving to widows who had nothing but a leaking cabin and the clothes on their backs. The settlement of Virginia City sprawled across the Comstock Lode like a promise of silver and gold. But for Penelope Bennett, it had delivered only heartbreak when fever took her husband last autumn. Now she knelt by this frozen creek at the edge of town, her worn skirts soaked through, her breath coming out in white clouds as she tried to finish the washing before her hands gave out completely. She did not hear him approach. Mountain men moved like shadows when they wanted to, and this one had been watching her for the better part of 10 minutes from the tree line, his jaw tight with concern at the sight of this fool woman washing clothes in water that could kill her. Bennett Thorne had spent the last 8 years in these mountains, trapping beaver and hunting elk, his massive frame growing harder and stronger with each passing season. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his beard was thick enough to keep his face warm in the worst storms. At 32 years old, he knew these mountains better than he knew anything else, and he knew that creek water in February was no place for delicate hands. "You are going to lose those fingers," he said, his voice a deep rumble that made Penelope gasp and spin around, nearly dropping the dress into the current. Her eyes went wide at the sight of him. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his buckskin jacket stretched tight across shoulders that looked like they could carry a horse. His arms were thick with muscle, his chest broad, and everything about him spoke of raw strength and survival. A rifle rested easy in the crook of one arm, and his dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "I have no choice," she managed to say, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "These need washing." Bennett looked at the pile of clothes on the bank, then at her blue fingers, then at her face. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and eyes the color of honey. Her cheekbones stood out too sharp in her face, telling him she had not been eating enough, and her dress was patched in 3 places he could see. "You have a choice," he said, already moving toward her. "The choice is to not die of cold doing laundry." He set his rifle against a tree and shrugged out of his heavy coat, revealing a dark wool shirt that still could not hide the powerful build of his arms and torso. Before Penelope could protest, he had draped the coat around her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled of pine smoke and leather. "I cannot take your coat," she protested, but her hands were already clutching it close because the warmth was too precious to refuse. "You already did," Bennett said. He crouched down and began gathering dry wood from beneath the nearby pines where the snow had not reached. "I am building you a fire. Then I am helping you finish this fool task, and then you are going to tell me why you are out here alone without even gloves." Penelope wanted to argue. She wanted to tell this stranger that she did not need help, that she had been managing on her own just fine since Robert died. But the words would not come because they would be lies, and she was too cold and too tired to muster up false pride. Bennett worked quickly, his large hands efficient as he arranged the wood and struck flint to steel. Within minutes, he had a fire crackling on the bank, the flames leaping up to push back the February cold. He positioned it close enough to warm her but far enough from the clothes to be safe. "Give me what needs washing," he said, holding out his hand. "You cannot wash clothes," Penelope said, but her voice was weak. "It is not proper work for a man. Proper does not matter when you are freezing to death." Bennett took the dress from her numb hands and waded into the creek without even flinching at the cold. The water came up to his knees, but he stood there like the temperature did not matter, like he was made of something harder than normal men. Penelope watched in amazement as he scrubbed the dress against the rocks with a competence that surprised her. His movements were sure and strong, and he worked faster than she ever could have. When that dress was clean, he wrung it out with his powerful hands and tossed it to her to spread near the fire, then reached for the next item. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, holding her hands close to the flames and feeling the painful prickling as sensation returned to her fingers. "Because you need help," Bennett said simply, scrubbing at a stain on one of her petticoats. "And because I remember what it is like to be alone with no one to turn to." There was something in his voice that spoke of old pain, of years spent in solitude that had not always been chosen. Penelope studied his profile as he worked, noting the strong line of his jaw beneath the beard, the concentration in his dark eyes, the way his muscles flexed with each movement. "I am a widow," she said quietly. "My husband died 4 months ago. The fever took him in 3 days." Bennett glanced at her and she saw understanding in his eyes. "I am sorry for your loss. We came here for the silver," Penelope continued, needing suddenly to tell someone her story. "Robert heard about the Comstock and thought we would make our fortune, but he was a clerk, not a miner. He took work in one of the stamp mills and the dust got into his lungs. When the fever came, he had no strength to fight it. And he left you with nothing," Bennett said. "It was not a question." "He left me with debts," Penelope admitted, shame coloring her voice. "The company store, the landlord, the doctor who tried to save him. I have been taking in laundry to pay them off, but it is slow going." Bennett finished with the petticoat and reached for a man's shirt that must have belonged to her dead husband. He paused, looking at it, then set it aside and reached for something else instead. "You do not have to wash his clothes anymore," he said gently. Penelope looked at the shirt and felt tears prick her eyes. "I know. I just have not been able to let them go yet." They worked in silence after that, Bennett doing the washing and Penelope spreading things by the fire to dry. The sun climbed higher in the sky, though it gave little warmth. Bennett's hands had to be freezing in that water, but he never complained, never slowed down. He just kept working until every item was clean. When the last piece was done, he climbed out of the creek and came to stand by the fire, his pants soaked to the thighs. Water dripped from his hands, but he simply held them to the flames and waited for them to warm. "Thank you," Penelope said, meaning it with everything in her. "I do not know what I would have done without your help. You would have finished eventually and probably gotten sick from the cold," Bennett said bluntly. "Do you have food at home?" The question caught her off guard. "I have some cornmeal, some salt pork. That is not enough." He studied her face again, taking in the hollows beneath her cheekbones, the way her dress hung loose on her frame. "When did you last eat meat?" Penelope could not remember. "I get by." "That is not what I asked." Bennett moved to where he had left his rifle and pulled a leather pack from behind the tree. He rummaged in it and produced a cloth-wrapped package that he handed to her. "Venison. I smoked it last week. It will keep you going for a few days." "I cannot accept this," Penelope protested, even as her stomach growled at the thought of real meat. "You have already done too much. You can accept it and you will," Bennett said in a tone that brooked no argument. "I have more back at my camp and I can hunt whenever I need to. You cannot." He was right and they both knew it. Penelope took the package with trembling hands. "How can I repay you? You do not need to repay me." Bennett looked at the clothes drying by the fire, then at the weak winter sun. "These will take time to dry properly. Where do you live?" "I have a cabin on the north edge of town," Penelope said. "It is not much, but it has a roof." "Show me," Bennett said. "I want to see if that roof leaks and if your stove works properly." Penelope wanted to protest that it was not proper for a strange man to come to her home, but what did propriety matter anymore? She was a widow struggling to survive, and this man had shown her more kindness in one morning than anyone in Virginia City had in 4 months. They gathered the damp clothes into her basket, and Bennett insisted on carrying it despite her protests. He shouldered his rifle and his pack, took up the basket like it weighed nothing, and followed her along the creek path toward town. Virginia City sprawled across Sun Mountain in a chaotic jumble of buildings and mine works. The Comstock load had brought thousands of people rushing to Nevada territory, all of them chasing dreams of silver and gold. The streets were mud and noise, full of miners and merchants, gamblers and painted ladies, all of them trying to scrape out a living from the rocky ground. Penelope's cabin sat on the very edge of this chaos, almost outside town proper. It was small and weathered, with a chimney that listed slightly to one side and shutters that hung crooked on their hinges. But it was hers, or at least it would be once she paid off what she owed on it. Bennett said nothing as they approached, but she saw his eyes taking in every detail, cataloging every problem. When she opened the door, he followed her inside and set the basket down, then immediately went to inspect the stove. "This flue is clogged," he said after a moment. "That is why you are not getting proper heat, and you have gaps around your door frame that are letting in cold air." "I know," Penelope said quietly. "I have not had time to fix them." Bennett turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was determination there, and a kind of fierce protectiveness that she had not seen in a man's eyes since her father died when she was 16. "I am going to fix them now," he said. "Do you have any rags I can use for chinking?" "You do not have to do this," Penelope said, but even as she spoke, she was pulling out the bag of cloth scraps she had been saving for just this purpose. "I know I do not have to," Bennett said, taking the bag from her. "I want to." He went to work immediately, using his knife to clean out the stove flue, then mixing mud and cloth scraps to chink the gaps around the door. Penelope hung the damp clothes on a line she had strung across the cabin and tried not to stare at the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he worked. "What is your name?" she asked finally, realizing they had been working together for hours and she did not even know what to call him. "Bennett Thorne," he said without looking up from where he was packing mud into a gap. "Most people call me Thorne, but you can call me Bennett if you like." "I am Penelope Bennett," she said. "Penelope Baker now, though I still think of myself as Bennett sometimes." "Bennett is a good name," he said with a slight smile. "Almost as good as Thorne." It was a small joke, but it made her smile for the first time in months. She watched him work, marveling at his competence, at the way he seemed to know exactly what to do to make her cabin more livable. When he finished with the door, he moved to the shutters, tightening hinges and replacing a broken slat with a piece of wood he whittled to fit. "Where is your camp?" Penelope asked, wanting to know more about this man who had appeared like an answer to prayers she had not known how to speak. "About 5 miles up into the mountains," Bennett said, gesturing vaguely east. "I have a shelter built into the rocks where I spend the winters. Come spring, I will move higher up to where the trapping is better." "You live alone?" "For the last 8 years." Bennett tested the shutter and seemed satisfied with his repair. "I came west after the war. I was at Gettysburg, saw things that made me want to get as far from people as possible. Found these mountains and decided to stay." Penelope heard the weight in his words, the memories he did not speak aloud. "The war was terrible," she said softly. "My brother died at Antietam." Bennett nodded, his expression somber. "Too many good men died in that war. Too many boys who should have had long lives ahead of them." They fell silent for a moment, both lost in thoughts of the dead. Then Bennett shook himself and moved to check the rest of the cabin, looking for other problems he could fix. "Your woodpile is low," he observed, looking at the few split logs stacked by the door. "Do you have an axe?" "I have one, but I am not very good with it," Penelope admitted. "I trade laundry for firewood when I can, but I have been running low this week." Bennett frowned. "That is not sustainable. You need a proper woodpile to get through what is left of winter." He glanced out the window at the angle of the sun. "It is too late to cut wood today, but I will come back tomorrow with my axe and split you enough to last the rest of the season." "Bennett, you have already done so much," Penelope protested. "I cannot keep accepting your help without giving anything in return." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her heart race. "You are giving me something in return," he said quietly. "You are giving me a reason to come down from that mountain." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to examine. Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the newly efficient stove. "I should let you rest," Bennett said after a moment. "You have had a hard morning. Cook some of that venison and eat well tonight. I will be back tomorrow to deal with your wood situation." "Will you stay for supper?" Penelope heard herself ask before she could think better of it. "It is the least I can do after everything you have done today." Bennett looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a wall coming down just a little. "I would like that," he said finally. Penelope felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. She had not cooked for anyone but herself in months, had not had company in her home since the women from the church had stopped by after Robert's death with their casseroles and their pitying looks. She moved to the stove, grateful for Bennett's repairs as she built up the fire. The venison he had given her was good quality, well smoked and rich. She cut thick slices and set them to cook in her single pan, adding some of the precious cornmeal to make johnnycakes. Bennett watched her work, standing awkwardly in the small space as if unsure what to do with himself. Finally, he pulled out one of her 2 chairs and sat down, his large frame making the furniture look child-sized. "You are good at this," he observed as she flipped the johnnycakes. "Cooking, I mean." "My mother taught me before she died," Penelope said. "She said a woman should know how to make a good meal out of whatever she has on hand. I have gotten very good at stretching ingredients these past months." "You should not have to stretch them so thin," Bennett said, and there was anger in his voice, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "A town full of men grown rich on silver, and they let a widow go hungry." "They do not know," Penelope said softly. "I have not told anyone how bad things are. Pride, I suppose, foolish pride." "Not foolish," Bennett said. "Human, we all need our dignity." The food was ready, and Penelope served it up on her 2 tin plates. The portions she gave Bennett were generous because he was a big man who needed fuel, and because she wanted to give him something in return for all he had done. They ate together at her small table, and it felt startlingly intimate, this sharing of a meal in her tiny cabin as the winter afternoon faded toward evening. "This is good," Bennett said around a mouthful of venison. "Really good. I have been eating my own cooking for so long I forgot what it is like to have food that actually tastes right." Penelope smiled, pleased by the compliment. "You are welcome to share my table any time you are in town," she said, then felt her cheeks heat at how forward that sounded. But Bennett just nodded, his expression serious. "I would like that," he said. "I would like that very much." They finished eating as the last light faded from the sky. Bennett helped her clean up, washing the tin plates in her basin with the same matter-of-fact competence he had shown at the creek. Then he gathered his rifle and his pack, shrugging back into his heavy coat. "I will be back tomorrow," he said at the door. "Early, so we can get the wood cut before the day gets away from us." "I will be here," Penelope said, and was surprised to realize how much she was looking forward to seeing him again. Bennett paused on the threshold, looking back at her. In the firelight, his face was all strong lines and shadows, his dark eyes unreadable. "You should bar this door after I leave," he said quietly. "Virginia City is not always safe for women alone." "I will," Penelope promised, touched by his concern. He nodded once and then he was gone, melting into the darkness like he had never been there at all. Penelope barred the door as he had instructed and then stood for a long moment. Her hand pressed to the wood, her mind full of thoughts of the mountain man who had appeared in her life like a gift from Providence. That night, she slept better than she had in months, warm in her properly heated cabin, her belly full of good food, and her heart lighter than it had been since Robert died. True to his word, Bennett returned just after dawn the next morning, carrying an axe that looked like it had seen hard use but was well maintained. Penelope heard his knock and opened the door to find him standing there with his breath misting in the cold air and snowflakes caught in his long hair. "It snowed overnight," he said by way of greeting. "Not much, just a dusting. Good thing we are cutting wood today. You will need it." Penelope had dressed in her warmest clothes and had wrapped herself in a shawl, ready to help however she could. Bennett took one look at her and shook his head. "You are not helping with the cutting," he said firmly. "That axe is heavy and the work is hard, but you can help stack what I split if you are determined to be useful." They went around to the back of her cabin where a stand of pines grew close enough to be convenient. Bennett selected a dead tree, checked to make sure it would fall safely, and then set to work. Penelope watched in fascination as he swung the axe, his powerful muscles flexing with each strike, his movements economical and precise. The tree came down with a crash that sent up a puff of snow. Bennett immediately began trimming the branches, then cutting the trunk into manageable sections. He worked steadily, never seeming to tire, his breath coming in white clouds but his rhythm never faltering. When he had a section cut to length, he would split it into firewood with swift, sure strokes of the axe, and Penelope would gather the pieces and carry them to stack against her cabin wall. They worked together in companionable silence, finding a rhythm that felt natural, almost effortless. By mid-morning, Bennett had felled a second tree and was working on splitting it. Penelope went inside to warm up and returned with 2 cups of coffee, strong and hot. Bennett accepted his gratefully, downing half of it in one long swallow. "You are going to have more wood than you know what to do with," he said, surveying his work with satisfaction. "Enough to last you through the rest of winter and well into spring." "I cannot thank you enough," Penelope said, looking at the growing woodpile with wonder. "This would have taken me weeks to accumulate if I could have managed it at all." "You needed help," Bennett said simply. "No shame in that." They returned to work, and by the time the sun was high overhead, Penelope had a woodpile that reached from the ground to the eaves of her cabin. Bennett drove the axe into a stump and stepped back, rolling his shoulders. "That should do it," he said. "Let me stack it properly so it sheds water." He spent another hour rearranging the wood, showing Penelope how to stack it so air could circulate but rain and snow would run off. His hands moved with practiced ease, and she found herself watching the play of muscles beneath his shirt again, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the physical labor. When he was finally satisfied, Bennett washed his hands in the snow and came to stand beside her, looking at the cabin with a critical eye. "Your roof needs some work," he said. "I can see places where the shingles are loose. That will cause leaks come spring when the snow melts." "I know," Penelope sighed. "The landlord says he will fix it, but he never does." Bennett's jaw tightened. "Who is your landlord?" "A man named Cyrus Morton. He owns several properties in town." I know Morton, Bennett said, and his voice had gone cold. He is the kind of man who would rather squeeze blood from a stone than do honest work. How much do you owe him? Penelope hesitated, embarrassed to admit the amount. 3 months back rent, $60. Bennett was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I have money saved, fur money. I do not need much up in the mountains, so it has been piling up at the bank here in town. Let me pay your rent. No, Penelope said immediately, alarmed. Absolutely not. I cannot take your money, Bennett. That would be too much. It is just sitting there, Bennett argued. Not doing anyone any good. Let me help you. You have already helped me more than I can ever repay, Penelope said firmly. The fire, the laundry, fixing my cabin, the wood. You have given me so much already. I cannot take your money too. Bennett looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in her expression must have told him she would not budge on this point. He nodded reluctantly. All right, he said. But if you change your mind, the offer stands, and I am still fixing that roof. You do not need to pay me to do that. It is just good sense to keep the rain out. Bennett, Penelope started to protest, but he cut her off with a raised hand. I am doing it whether you like it or not, he said. So you might as well save your breath and invite me in for lunch instead. Despite herself, Penelope laughed. There was something about this gruff, determined man that made her feel lighter, more hopeful than she had felt in a very long time. They went inside, and Penelope made more Jonna cakes and cooked more of the venison. Bennett ate with obvious appreciation, and they talked as they shared the meal. He told her stories of his years in the mountains, of tracking wolves through fresh snow and watching eagles soar over the peaks. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and her lost brother, about the dreams she and Robert had shared before they came west. You regret it? Bennett asked. Coming to Virginia City, Penelope thought about the question carefully. I regret how it ended, she said finally. But I do not regret the journey. Robert and I were happy even when things were hard, and if I had not come here, I would never have met you. The words hung in the air between them, more honest than she had intended. Bennett's dark eyes held hers, and she saw something kindle in their depths, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. I am glad you came, he said quietly. Even though it cost you so much, I am glad you are here. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken feeling settling around them. Finally, Bennett pushed back from the table and stood. I should go check my traps, he said, but I will be back in a few days to work on that roof. In the meantime, if you need anything, if anyone gives you trouble, you can leave word at the general store. The owner there, Frank Wilson, knows how to find me. Thank you, Penelope said, standing as well. For everything, Bennett, truly. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression that made her heart skip. You do not need to thank me, Penelope. Taking care of you is not a burden, it is a privilege. Then he was gone, leaving her standing in the middle of her warm cabin with her cheeks flushed and her pulse racing. Over the following days, Penelope found herself thinking about Bennett Thorne constantly. She went about her work, taking in laundry from the miners and merchants who could afford such services, scrubbing and washing and ironing until her hands were raw. But even as she worked, her mind drifted to the mountain man with the dark eyes and the powerful hands who had shown her such unexpected kindness. She found herself watching for him every time she went outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of his tall figure moving through town. She lay awake at night remembering the sound of his voice, the way he had looked at her across her small table, the warmth in his eyes when he said taking care of her was a privilege. 4 days after their lunch together, Penelope heard someone on her roof. She stepped outside to find Bennett up there with a hammer and a bag of shingles, working to repair the damage. Where did you get those shingles? She called up to him. Bought them at the lumber yard, Bennett called back, not pausing in his work. "Do not worry about the cost. I told you, I have more money than I need sitting at the bank." Penelope wanted to argue, but she was learning that Bennett Thorne was a stubborn man who did what he thought was right regardless of what anyone else said. So instead, she went inside and baked bread, using some of the flour she had earned from her laundry work. When Bennett climbed down from the roof several hours later, she handed him a thick slice spread with the last of her butter. "Your roof is fixed," he said, accepting the bread with a smile. "It should hold for years now." "You are too good to me," Penelope said, and meant it. Bennett shook his head. "I am just doing what any decent man would do," he said. "The fact that other men in this town have not helped you says more about them than it does about me." He ate the bread in a few large bites, then brushed the crumbs from his beard. Penelope noticed he had trimmed it recently, and his hair looked cleaner, like he had made an effort with his appearance. "Would you like to stay for supper?" she asked, hoping he would say yes. Bennett's face lit up in a way that made him look younger, less careworn. "I would like that very much," he said. This became their pattern over the following weeks. Bennett would appear every few days, always with some excuse about checking on her stove, or bringing her fresh meat, or making sure her woodpile was holding up. They would share a meal, and they would talk, the conversations ranging from trivial matters to deeper discussions about their hopes and fears, and the lives they had lived before fate brought them together. Penelope learned that Bennett had grown up on a farm in Pennsylvania, the youngest of 6 children. His father had died when he was 12, and he had worked the land alongside his brothers until the war came and swept them all away. He had survived Gettysburg only to come home and find his mother dead and his brothers scattered to the winds. So he had gone west, seeking solitude and peace in the mountains. Bennett learned that Penelope had been the only daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress, doted on by parents who had given her an education unusual for a girl of her station. She could read and write and do figures, skills that had made her attractive to Robert Baker, a clerk who had dreamed of bettering himself. They had married when she was 20, full of hope for the future, and had come west 2 years later chasing the promise of silver. "He was a good man," Penelope said one evening as they sat by her stove, the winter darkness pressing against the windows. "Robert, I mean. He was kind to me and he worked hard, but he was not strong enough for this country. It used him up and threw him away." "This country takes a lot of people that way," Bennett said quietly. "It is not a gentle place. You have to be hard to survive here." "You are hard," Penelope observed, looking at his strong face in the firelight. "But you are not cruel. There is a difference." Bennett looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You make me want to be gentle," he said. "You make me remember there is more to life than just surviving." The air between them seemed to thicken with possibility. Penelope felt her heart racing, felt the pull of attraction she had been trying to ignore for weeks. Bennett was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting and cherishing, and it had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way. "Bennett," she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say but needing to say something. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I should go," he said, his voice rough. "It is getting late." Penelope felt a stab of disappointment but nodded. She walked him to the door, acutely aware of how small her cabin was, how close they were standing in the narrow space. Bennett paused with his hand on the door frame, looking down at her. "Penelope," he said, and her name sounded different in his deep voice, like something important and meaningful. "I need you to know something." "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I have been trying not to, telling myself it is too soon for you, that you are still grieving your husband, but it is the truth, and I am not a man who lies. I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know." Penelope stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I am falling in love with you too," she confessed. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but you make me feel alive, Bennett. You make me feel like there might be a future worth looking forward to." The smile that broke across Bennett's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and when she did not, he cupped her face in his large, calloused hand. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right. Can I do that? Can I court you, Penelope Bennett Baker?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, you can court me." Bennett leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. Then he stepped back, his hand falling away, though she could see the effort it cost him. "I will see you tomorrow," he promised. "And the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as you will have me." After he left, Penelope leaned against the closed door and let herself smile until her cheeks hurt. She had thought her life was over when Robert died, had thought she would spend her remaining years struggling alone in this harsh country. But Bennett Thorne had appeared like a miracle, offering her not just help but hope, not just survival but the possibility of love. The next morning, Penelope woke to find a bundle on her doorstep. Inside were 4 rabbits, cleaned and ready for cooking, along with a handful of early wildflowers that must have grown in some protected valley where spring came sooner. There was no note, but she knew they were from Bennett, and she pressed the flowers between the pages of her Bible to preserve them. When Bennett came that evening, she had made rabbit stew, rich and savory, and he ate 3 bowls of it while she watched with satisfaction. "You are going to fatten me up," he said, leaning back in his chair with a contented sigh. "You could use some fattening," Penelope teased. "You are nothing but muscle and bone." Bennett laughed, a deep, rich sound that seemed to fill her small cabin. "And you could use some fattening yourself," he retorted. "You are too thin, Penelope. I can see your collarbones through your dress." "I am eating better now than I was before you came," she admitted. "Thanks to all the meat you keep bringing me." "Good," Bennett said with satisfaction. "A woman should not have to go hungry, especially not a woman like you." "What do you mean, a woman like me?" Penelope asked, curious. Bennett looked at her for a long moment. "A woman who is strong and brave and kind," he said. "A woman who kept going even when things were impossible. A woman worth taking care of." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes at his words. "You see me differently than I see myself," she said softly. "Then maybe you need to start seeing yourself through my eyes," Bennett said. "Because from where I sit, you are remarkable." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling in the stove, the winter wind whistling outside. Then Bennett spoke again, his voice hesitant in a way she had not heard from him before. "Penelope, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "All right," she said, wondering at his serious tone. "Are you truly ready to move forward?" he asked. "I know your husband has only been gone for months. I do not want to rush you or make you feel like you have to choose me because I have helped you. If you need more time to grieve, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need." Penelope considered the question carefully because it deserved a careful answer. The truth was that she had done most of her grieving in the weeks before Robert died, watching him waste away, knowing there was nothing she could do to save him. By the time he actually passed, it had almost been a relief, a release from suffering for both of them. "Robert and I married for practical reasons more than romantic ones," she said slowly. "We cared for each other and we were companions, but it was not a grand passion. I grieved for him, and I will always be sorry he died so young and so far from where he was meant to be. But I am ready to live again, Bennett. I am ready to feel again. And what I feel when I am with you is something I never felt with Robert." "What do you feel?" Bennett asked, his dark eyes intent on her face. "Safe," Penelope said. "Cherished, like I matter to someone, like there is someone in this world who sees me and cares about what happens to me." She paused, then added in a whisper, "And when you look at me, I feel beautiful, even though I know I am too thin and my dress is patched and my hands are rough from work." Bennett reached across the table and took her hand in his thumb stroking gently over her knuckles. "You are beautiful," he said firmly. "The most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and your hands are not rough. They are capable and strong, and I admire them." Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You are the only person in the world who would call these hands admirable," she said, looking at her reddened, work-worn fingers. "Then the rest of the world is blind," Bennett said simply. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to the back of it, his lips warm and gentle. The gesture was so courtly, so unexpectedly tender from this rough mountain man, that Penelope felt something inside her chest crack open and spill warmth through her whole body. "I need to tell you something too," Bennett said, still holding her hand. "About what I want, what I am hoping for." "Tell me," Penelope urged. "I want to marry you," Bennett said bluntly. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I want to take you away from this cabin and this landlord who does not care if you freeze. I want to build you a proper house where you will be warm and safe. I want to hunt for you and provide for you, and make sure you never have to scrub laundry in freezing water again. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to give you children if you want them, and if you do not, I want to give you whatever else would make you happy. I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that you matter, that you are important, that you are loved." Penelope could not speak around the lump in her throat. She had never heard anything so beautiful, so heartfelt. Bennett was looking at her with such hope and vulnerability in his eyes, this strong, powerful man who had survived war and wilderness, offering her his heart like it was something fragile and precious. "Yes," she managed to say. "Yes to all of it. Yes to everything." The joy that lit Bennett's face was something she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He stood and pulled her up with him, and then she was in his arms, wrapped in his strength and his warmth, his heart beating against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "I swear to you, Penelope, I will spend every day of my life making you happy." "You already make me happy," she said, tilting her face up to look at him. "You have made me happier in these past weeks than I have been in years." Bennett lowered his head and kissed her, a proper kiss this time, his lips claiming hers with a gentleness that belied his strength. Penelope melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her whole body alive with sensation. He tasted like coffee and rabbit stew and something uniquely him, and she never wanted the kiss to end. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said reluctantly, "before I forget myself and stay too long." "I wish you could stay," Penelope admitted. "I wish you did not have to go back to your camp in the mountains." "Soon," Bennett promised. "Soon I will not have to leave you at all, but for now I want to do this properly. I want to court you the way you deserve to be courted, so that no one in this town can say anything against us when we marry." Penelope understood what he meant. She was a widow, and there were expectations about how long she should grieve before moving on. But she also knew that in the West, where life was hard and uncertain, people tended to be more practical about such things. Bennett kissed her once more, softly, then forced himself to step away. "I am going to town tomorrow to see about buying some land," he said. "There is a piece about 2 miles from here, good water and timber, protected from the worst winds. I want to build our house there." "Our house," Penelope repeated, loving the sound of those words. "Our house," Bennett confirmed with a smile. "I will come by tomorrow evening to tell you how it went." After he left, Penelope danced around her cabin like a girl, her heart so full of happiness she thought it might burst. She had been so alone, so afraid, and now suddenly she had Bennett, this incredible man who wanted to build her a house and fill her life with love. The next evening, Bennett arrived with news that he had indeed purchased the land, paying cash from his savings. "I met with a builder too," he told Penelope as they sat together by the stove. "A man named Hans Eriksson who knows his craft. He says he can start as soon as the weather warms enough, probably late March. The house will be finished by June." "So fast?" Penelope asked, surprised. "I am paying him well to make it a priority," Bennett said. "And it will not be a big house. 2 rooms to start, with space to add on later if we need it. But it will be solid and warm with a good stove and a real glass window." "It sounds wonderful," Penelope said, imagining a home that was truly hers, not rented from an indifferent landlord but built with love and care. "When the house is finished, will you marry me?" Bennett asked. "I know it is not traditional to set the date before I have even asked your father for permission, but since you have no father to ask, I am asking you." "Yes," Penelope said without hesitation. "I will marry you in June as soon as the house is ready." Bennett pulled her into his arms and held her close. "For months," he murmured into her hair. "4 months until you are mine and I am yours in front of God and everyone." Those 4 months passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. Bennett spent his days working with Hans Eriksson and his crew to build the house, and his evenings with Penelope. They walked together through Virginia City, making their courtship public, and while there was some gossip about the widow Baker taking up with a mountain man so soon after her husband's death, most people seemed to approve of the match. "That Thorne fellow is solid," Frank Wilson at the general store told Penelope one day. "Known him for years. He is a hard worker and honest as they come. You could do a lot worse." Cyrus Morton, Penelope's landlord, was less pleased. He came by one evening, his face red with anger, demanding to know if it was true she was planning to marry Bennett Thorne. "It is true," Penelope confirmed, standing straight and proud. "We will be married in June." "You owe me 3 months' rent," Morton sputtered. "You cannot just leave without paying what you owe." "I will pay you every cent," Penelope said calmly. "Bennett has agreed to loan me the money and I will work it off doing laundry. You will get your money, Mr. Morton." The landlord looked like he wanted to argue further, but at that moment, Bennett appeared around the corner of the cabin, his arms full of firewood. He set it down carefully and moved to stand beside Penelope, his presence solid and protective. "Is there a problem here?" Bennett asked, his voice pleasant enough but with an edge that suggested Morton should think carefully about his answer. The landlord took one look at Bennett's size and obvious strength and seemed to reconsider whatever he had been about to say. "No problem," he muttered. "Just wanted to make sure I would get paid what I am owed." "You will get paid," Bennett said. "In fact, I will pay you right now if you have the deed and can figure what she owes." Morton's eyes lit up with greed. $60 for the back rent," he said quickly. Bennett pulled a leather pouch from his pocket and counted out $60 in silver coins. Morton snatched them up eagerly, then hurried away as if afraid Bennett would change his mind. "You did not have to do that," Penelope said, though she was relieved to have that debt finally settled. "I wanted to," Bennett said simply. "I do not like the way he looks at you. Now he has no excuse to come around here anymore." March turned to April, and the snow began to melt in earnest. Penelope watched the house take shape on the land Bennett had purchased, her heart swelling with pride and anticipation. It was a solid structure, built of pine logs chinked with mud and moss, with a steep roof to shed snow and a wide porch where they could sit on summer evenings. Inside, Hans Eriksson and his crew built a large stone fireplace that would heat the main room, and they installed a cooking stove that made Penelope gasp with delight when she first saw it. There were real glass windows, 3 of them, that would let in light and air. There was a bedroom with space for a real bed, not just a straw pallet. There were shelves and cupboards and a table that Bennett himself built during the long evenings. "It is perfect," Penelope breathed when Bennett brought her to see it in late May. "It is more than I ever dreamed of." "It is just the beginning," Bennett promised. "We will make this place a home together, Penelope. We will fill it with love and laughter and, God willing, children." They were married on a sunny day in mid-June, standing on the porch of their new house with the mountains rising behind them and wildflowers blooming at their feet. The ceremony was simple, conducted by the circuit preacher who traveled through Virginia City once a month. Frank Wilson stood as Bennett's witness, and a kind woman named Martha Green, who ran a boarding house, stood as Penelope's. Penelope wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Bennett had bought for her, pale blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She had put her hair up with pins, and Martha had lent her a comb to hold it in place. She had never felt more beautiful than she did standing on that porch with Bennett looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever spoken. Bennett wore new clothes too, dark pants and a white shirt that stretched tight across his broad shoulders. He had trimmed his hair and beard, though both were still longer than was fashionable in town. He looked strong and handsome and entirely hers, and when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I, Bennett Thorne, take you, Penelope Baker, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you and cherish you, to protect you and provide for you in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us." Penelope's voice shook a little when she said her vows, but her eyes never left Bennett's face. "I, Penelope Baker, take you, Bennett Thorne, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you and honor you, to stand beside you and support you in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us." The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Bennett kissed her there in front of God and witnesses, a kiss that was both chaste and full of promise. Then their small group went inside for the wedding feast Penelope had prepared, simple fare but made with love. That night, after their guests had left and the sun had set behind the mountains, Bennett carried Penelope over the threshold of their house. He set her down gently in the main room, and they stood together looking at their home, their future, spread out before them. "Are you happy?" Bennett asked, taking her hands in his. "I am happier than I have ever been," Penelope said truthfully. "I did not think it was possible to feel this much joy." Bennett pulled her close and kissed her properly, deeply, with all the passion he had been holding back during their courtship. Penelope responded with equal fervor, her hands roaming over his broad chest, feeling the strength of him, the solidness. "You are mine now," Bennett murmured against her lips. "My wife, my Penelope." "And you are mine," she replied. "My husband, my Bennett." They made love that night in their new bed, in their new house, and it was nothing like the dutiful coupling Penelope had known with Robert. Bennett was tender and passionate by turns, taking his time to learn what pleased her, murmuring words of love and praise against her skin. He made her feel cherished and desired and beautiful, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Penelope knew she had found her place in the world. The months that followed were the happiest of Penelope's life. She and Bennett settled into marriage with an ease that surprised them both. Bennett split his time between hunting and trapping in the mountains and working around their homestead, building a barn and fencing a garden plot. Penelope kept the house, tended the garden, and learned to preserve meat and vegetables against the coming winter. They worked side by side, their partnership natural and comfortable. Bennett taught Penelope to shoot so she would be able to protect herself and hunt for food if he was ever away. Penelope taught Bennett to read better than he had learned in his brief schooling, and they spent long winter evenings with her reading aloud from the few books they owned while he carved or mended equipment. In September, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Bennett one evening over supper, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through several expressions, shock and joy and fear, before settling on pure elation. "A baby," he breathed, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. He placed his large hand gently on her still flat belly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Bennett said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have given me everything, Penelope. A home, a purpose, a reason to be more than just a man surviving in the wilderness. And now a child. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" Their daughter was born in May of 1868, delivered by Martha Green, who had become a good friend to Penelope over the past year. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Bennett, pacing outside, feared he would lose both wife and child. But Penelope was strong, stronger than anyone had given her credit for, and she brought their daughter into the world with a final triumphant push. Bennett held his daughter for the first time with hands that shook with awe and terror. She was so small, so fragile, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same honey brown as her mother's. "What should we call her?" he asked, unable to look away from the miracle in his arms. "I was thinking Sarah," Penelope said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "After your mother." Bennett's eyes filled with tears. He had not cried since he was a boy, but the gift Penelope had just given him, this recognition of his lost family, broke something open inside him. "Sarah," he agreed, his voice thick. "Sarah Thorne. It is perfect." They raised Sarah in that house on the edge of Virginia City, teaching her to love the mountains and respect the wildness around them. Bennett was a devoted father, patient and gentle with his daughter in a way that always made Penelope fall in love with him all over again. He carved her toys and told her stories and carried her on his broad shoulders as he checked his traps. 2 years after Sarah was born, Penelope gave Bennett a son, a robust boy they named James after her lost brother. Bennett was thrilled to have a son, but not more thrilled than he had been with Sarah, and Penelope loved him all the more for treating both his children with equal devotion. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Virginia City boomed and then began to decline as the easily accessible silver played out. Some people left, moving on to new strikes in other territories. But Bennett and Penelope stayed, carving out a life from the rugged land, raising their children with love and care. In 1872, they added 2 more rooms to the house and built a proper barn. Bennett's trapping brought in good money, and Penelope started taking in sewing work, her skill with a needle becoming known throughout the region. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Sarah grew into a strong, independent girl who could shoot as well as her father and sew as well as her mother. James was quieter, thoughtful, with a gift for drawing that delighted Penelope. In 1873, they welcomed another son, Peter, and in 1876, twin girls, Rose and Margaret, completed their family. Their house was full of noise and love and laughter. Bennett, who had spent 8 years alone in the mountains, now could not imagine a life without the chaos of children and the steady, grounding presence of Penelope. She was his anchor, his home, the best thing that had ever happened to him. "You remember the day we met?" Bennett asked one winter evening in 1878. They sat together on the porch swing he had built, wrapped in blankets, watching their children play in the snow. Sarah was 19 now and being courted by a nice young man from town. James was 17, already as tall as his father. The younger children, Peter 12 and the twins 6, were having a snowball fight that was more laughter than competition. "I remember," Penelope said, snuggling closer to her husband. "You found me washing clothes in that freezing creek, looking like a half-drowned rat." "You looked beautiful," Bennett corrected. "Stubborn and proud and too brave for your own good. I knew right then I was going to fall in love with you." "You did not know any such thing," Penelope teased. "You thought I was a fool woman who was going to lose her fingers to frostbite." "That too," Bennett admitted with a laugh. "But mostly I thought you were the most remarkable woman I had ever seen, and I was not wrong." Penelope looked at the life they had built together, the house and the barn and the children, and felt her heart swell with contentment. "I was so alone that day," she said softly. "So tired and afraid and certain I would not survive another winter, and then you appeared like some kind of miracle." "You were the miracle," Bennett said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You gave me a reason to come down from that mountain. You gave me a life worth living." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, secure in the love they had built together. It had started with a fire built beside a frozen creek and clothes washed in icy water, with a mountain man's kindness and a widow's desperate need. But it had grown into something neither of them could have imagined, a love deep and true and lasting. In 1882, Sarah married her young man, a mining engineer named Thomas Wright, who treated her with the same devotion Bennett showed Penelope. They settled in Virginia City, and within a year, Sarah had given Bennett and Penelope their first grandchild, a boy they named Bennett after his grandfather. James, who had no interest in mining or trapping, used his artistic talent to become a surveyor, mapping the territories as they opened up. He traveled extensively, but always came home to the house on the edge of Virginia City, to the parents who had encouraged his dreams. Peter followed his father into the mountains, learning the ways of trapping and tracking. The twins, Rose and Margaret, were inseparable and as different as night and day. Rose was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring. Margaret was quieter, with a gift for music that she had somehow inherited despite neither of her parents being particularly musical. Through it all, Bennett and Penelope remained devoted to each other. They grew older together, Bennett's dark hair turning silver, Penelope's face gaining lines from years of smiling. His body stayed strong from his work in the mountains, and she remained vital and active, her hands never idle. In 1890, on their 24th wedding anniversary, Bennett took Penelope back to the place where they had first met. The creek still flowed there, though Virginia City had spread out and grown around it over the years. They stood on the bank where he had built her a fire all those years ago. "I think about that day often," Bennett said, holding her hand. "How close I came to not stopping, to just riding past and leaving you to struggle alone." "But you did not," Penelope said, squeezing his fingers. "You stopped and you helped me and you changed my life." "We changed each other's lives," Bennett corrected. He pulled her close, and even though they were both in their 50s now, the embrace felt as right as it had on their wedding night. "I love you, Penelope Thorne. I have loved you since the moment I saw you kneeling by this creek, too stubborn to admit you needed help." "And I love you, Bennett Thorne," Penelope replied. "My mountain man, my protector, my best friend, the love of my life." They stood together by the creek as the sun set behind the mountains, two people who had found each other in the hardest of circumstances and built a life of love and joy. They had weathered every storm together, had celebrated every triumph and mourned every loss as one. The years continued to pass, measured in seasons and grandchildren. Bennett and Penelope watched their children and grandchildren grow, watched Virginia City boom and bust and settle into a quieter existence as the frontier pushed westward. They grew old together in the house Bennett had built, their love deepening with each passing year. In 1898, on a warm summer evening, Bennett and Penelope sat on their porch swing surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Sarah and Thomas were there with their 4 children. James had brought his new wife, a woman he had met on his travels. Peter had come down from his mountain camp with stories of the spring hunt. The twins, now grown women, sat together as always, Rose bouncing her toddler son on her knee while Margaret's fingers played phantom melodies on her skirt. "Tell us the story again, Grandpa," young Bennett asked. He was 16 now, tall and strong like his namesake. "Tell us how you and Grandma met." Bennett looked at Penelope, and she smiled at him, the same smile that had captured his heart 31 years ago. He began the story they had told so many times, about a mountain man who saw a widow washing clothes in freezing water, who built her a fire and helped her finish. But as he told it, he knew it was not just a story about laundry and kindness. It was a story about 2 lonely people finding each other in the wilderness. It was about courage and hope and the possibility of new beginnings. It was about a love that had sustained them through decades of hard work and joy, sorrow and celebration. It was the story of their life together, and it was beautiful. When Bennett finished speaking, the family sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and purple. Penelope leaned against Bennett's solid shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, grateful for every moment they had shared. "I would do it all again," Bennett murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Every hardship, every challenge, every difficult day. I would do it all again for the privilege of loving you." "As would I," Penelope whispered back. "As would I, my love." They sat together as darkness fell, surrounded by the family they had created, secure in a love that had started beside a frozen creek and had grown to encompass everything that mattered. It was a good life, a full life, built on the foundation of a simple act of kindness that had blossomed into something extraordinary. And when they finally went inside, hand in hand as they had done for over 3 decades, they went as they had always been, 2 halves of a whole, partners in every sense of the word, still deeply and completely in love. The winter of 1903 was harsh, even by Nevada standards. Bennett, now 68 years old, still insisted on checking his traps despite Penelope's concerns about the cold. He was not as young as he used to be, though his body remained strong from a lifetime of hard work. "You do not need to go out in this weather," Penelope told him one particularly bitter morning. "We have enough put by. Let the young men handle the mountains this year." But Bennett just kissed her forehead and pulled on his heavy coat. "I have been going into these mountains for over 40 years, he said. "A little cold will not stop me now." He was gone for 3 days, which was not unusual. But when he returned, Penelope could see the exhaustion in his face, the way he moved more carefully than usual. She fussed over him, making him hot soup and coffee, wrapping him in blankets by the fire. "I am fine," he insisted, but that night he developed a cough that worried her. The cough persisted through January and into February. Bennett, stubborn as always, refused to see a doctor, insisting it was just a cold that would pass. But Penelope, who had lost her first husband to illness, was not so sanguine. She finally convinced him to let Martha Green's son, who had trained as a doctor back east, examine him. "Doctor." Green's face was grave after the examination. "It is pneumonia," he told Penelope quietly while Bennett dozed by the fire. "His lungs are badly congested. At his age, with the years of breathing cold mountain air and smoke, this is very serious." Penelope's blood ran cold. "What can we do?" "Keep him warm and rested. Steam treatments to help him breathe. Willow bark tea for the fever. And pray," Dr. Green said honestly. "He is a strong man, Mrs. Thorne. If anyone can fight this off, it is him." But even Bennett's formidable strength had its limits. As February dragged on, he grew weaker despite all of Penelope's devoted nursing. Their children came home, gathering around their father's bedside with worried faces. Bennett, even in his weakened state, remained clear-headed. He called each of his children to him privately, speaking words of love and advice, making sure they knew how proud he was of them all. Then he asked for time alone with Penelope. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, trying not to cry. "Do not look so sad, my love," Bennett said, his voice rough from coughing. "We have had a good life together, a better life than I ever dared to dream of." "We were supposed to have more time," Penelope said, tears streaming down her face despite her efforts to contain them. "We have had 37 years, Bennett reminded her. 37 years of love and happiness and family. That is more than most people get in a lifetime." "It is not enough," Penelope whispered. "It will never be enough." Bennett squeezed her hand weakly. "Remember that day by the creek?" he asked. "Remember how lost we both were, how alone?" "I remember," Penelope said. "We saved each other that day," Bennett said. "You gave me a reason to live, Penelope. You gave me everything, and I want you to promise me something." "Anything," Penelope said. "Promise me you will keep living," Bennett said urgently. "Promise me you will not give up. Our children and grandchildren need you. Keep telling them our story. Keep loving them the way you loved me. Promise me." "I promise," Penelope choked out, "but I do not want to do it without you." "You will not be without me," Bennett said, touching his hand to her heart. "I will be right here always. Death cannot separate what we have built together." He was right. When Bennett Thorne died on a cold March morning in 1904, surrounded by his family, he slipped away peacefully, Penelope's hand in his. She held him close one last time, whispering words of love, thanking him for every day they had shared. The grief was crushing, but Penelope kept her promise. She continued living in the house Bennett had built, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the mountain man who had rescued a widow by a frozen creek and stayed to build a life with her. She lived for another 18 years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that the love she and Bennett had shared continued on in the strong, loving families their children had created. When Penelope died peacefully in her sleep in 1922, at the age of 78, her last thoughts were of Bennett. She imagined him waiting for her, strong and young again, ready to take her hand and lead her wherever they were meant to go next. They buried her beside him on a hillside overlooking their homestead, the mountains rising behind them, the valley spread out below. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, speaking of a love that had transcended hardship and time, a love that had started with a simple act of kindness and had grown to encompass generations. And if sometimes, on cold February mornings, people walking by the old creek claimed to see a tall man with dark hair building a fire on the bank, and a woman with auburn hair smiling at him with joy and recognition, well, perhaps that was just fancy. Or perhaps some loves are too strong to be contained by death, too powerful to be forgotten, too true to ever really end. The house Bennett built still stands at the edge of what is now the old section of Virginia City, preserved by the descendants of Bennett and Penelope Thorne as a reminder of where their family began. Inside, visitors can see the table Bennett carved, the stove he installed for Penelope, the swing on the porch where they sat together on summer evenings. But more than the physical structure, what endures is the story, passed down through 5 generations now, of 2 people who found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful. It is a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories start with the simplest gestures, that kindness can change lives, and that when 2 people commit to each other fully and completely, they create something that outlasts them both. The story of the mountain man who saw a widow washing clothes in freezing water, who built her a fire and helped her finish, who stayed and loved her for the rest of his life, is more than just a family legend. It is a testament to the power of love, the importance of compassion, and the possibility of hope even in the darkest times. And in Virginia City, Nevada, where the mountains still stand tall and the creeks still run cold in winter, that story lives on.